Today, at our webinar, we have a very special guest. It is our Macmillan author, who is known in Ukraine, who is loved by Ukrainian teachers due to many things. Malcolm Mann is known as the author of our best-selling courses, Laser and Destination. We asked him to do this webinar especially for Ukrainian teachers. You see the topic of the webinar, Teaching, Writing an Informal Letter. I would also like to remark that Malcolm is the co-author of our new course for Ukraine, which is called Get to 100. I'm happy to give the floor. Malcolm, hello.
Let me just get my video going. Right.
Hello,
Hello,
Malcolm.
hello. Can you see me? Can you hear me? If you can, type. Now you see me. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Excellent. Right. Hello, hello, hello. It is wonderful to see so many people here today from all over Ukraine. It's 4 o'clock in Ukraine, and it's 4 o'clock where I am too, in Athens, in Greece. Thank you very much, Inna, for that lovely introduction. It's wonderful to be here doing this webinar for Ukraine. As Inna said, we're going to be talking about teaching, writing an informal letter. And over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to put up quite a lot of information on the screen. Don't feel that you have to take lots of notes. You don't have to take any notes at all, because at the end of the webinar, you'll be able to download a PDF with all of the slides. So you don't have to write anything down, but occasionally over the next 30 minutes or so, just to keep you awake, I will be asking you a few questions and getting you to do a couple of small tasks. So teaching, writing an informal letter. Now, Helen from Macmillan asked me to cover this topic because she said that students in Ukraine, not all of them, I think, but a lot of them, some of them, do have problems writing a successful informal letter. So let me just start by asking you if you think that is the case. Do some of your students have problems writing an informal letter? Let me just have a look at the chat box. Natalia says yes. Ola says yes. Yes, they do. Well, that's good. Obviously, it's not good that they have problems writing an informal letter, but it's good that that's what we're talking about today. So I'd like to ask you now to quickly think, what is it about writing an informal letter that your students find particularly difficult? What are the things that they're not successful at? What are the things that they often get wrong? The main one or two things that they struggle with. Rosanna says sentence structure. The form, yes. Anything else? The structure of the letter, the layout, grammar, greetings, right, excellent. The ending of the letter, vocabulary, word order, subtopics, content. Right, excellent. That's exactly what we're going to be talking about. So let's have an example informal letter question from the Ukrainian state exam. This was from, I think, last year's sample paper. I'm just going to read it. You have received a letter from your pen friend in which he or she writes that he or she has been playing basketball for years. Now he or she has decided to start judo. Write him or her a letter in which you explain whether you support his or her decision to take up one more kind of sport and why, what kinds of sport are popular with your friends, and whether you do any sports or watch sports competitions on TV. And I've got a second example here. This is from Get 200. And this shows, which I think is the case, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that actually now in the Ukrainian state exams, we know that actually the students are given the beginning and the end of the letter. And if that's the case, then I think that certainly makes it a lot easier. But of course, students might be writing an informal letter for other exams when they're not given the beginning and the end of the letter. So if we give a writing task like this to our students, and we just say, here's the question, go away and write that composition for homework and bring it in tomorrow and hand it in, and then I'll correct it. I think it's not surprising at all if students are not successful. And the reason for that is there are so many different aspects. You've just mentioned a whole load of them in the chat box. There are so many different aspects that can go wrong. Understanding the task, actually there's a lot of text in that writing task and a lot of vocabulary to take up a sport, decision, support. If the students don't understand the task, or they misunderstand the task, so they think it's asking one thing when it's actually asking another thing, then they're not going to be successful. They have to come up with a lot of information. Some of it is factual information, such as what kinds of sports are popular with your friends. But they also have to use their imagination, their common sense, their general knowledge to come up with other information. Whether you support the decision to take up one more kind of sport and why, you've got to give a reason. And that's difficult, to use your imagination, your general knowledge, your common sense sometimes to come up with sensible reasons. Not starting the letter in an appropriate way. Somebody mentioned that in the chat box. Absolutely, the conventions of letter writing, if students don't know them, for some exams, that's extremely important. Of course, if they are given the beginning of the letter and given the end of the letter, that does actually, I think, make it a lot easier. Not mentioning all of the information from the question. You might have understood the question, but in the stress of the exam condition, for example, you might just forget to include some of the information, and then you'll be marked down, of course. Paragraphing, I think, is important. With that particular task there, we've got three main things we need to include: whether you support the decision and why, the kinds of sports that are popular with your friends, and whether you do any sports or watch sports on TV. So that could be 3 paragraphs. It could be 2 paragraphs, I think, maybe 1 paragraph for the decision and the reason, and then another paragraph about you and your friends. But I certainly think it shouldn't all be in 1 paragraph. So paragraphing is important. As people said in the chat box, poor grammar and showing that you don't have a broad range of grammar is going to make you lose marks and show that it's not a successful piece of writing. Poor vocabulary and showing you don't have a broad range of vocabulary is going to mean that you don't get as many marks as you should. Punctuation, of course, is important. And register and formality are important. This is not just a letter, it's an informal letter. And our students need to understand exactly what that means. And I think that's a big area that we need to do a lot of work on. Not ending the letter, we've said this, in an appropriate way. In some exams, that's extremely important. Obviously, if they're given the end of the letter, then that does make it a lot easier. And another key mistake I think that a lot of students make when they're doing homework and in an exam, they finish writing and then they think they finished. They don't read it through again carefully to check that it's correct, to check that there aren't mistakes, to check their grammar, to check their spelling, to check their punctuation, to check their formality. And if they don't do that, the chances are there will be silly mistakes in it. And so if we just give our students the question and tell them to go away and write the composition, any or all of those things can go wrong. And so we need to turn that on its head, and we need to make sure when students are writing a composition that they do understand the task, that they are able to come up with the information and use their imagination where necessary, that they mention all of the information in the question, that they think about paragraphing and think about showing they've got a broad range of grammar and of vocabulary, that they think about their punctuation and register and formality, and depending on the exam, depending on exactly what we're doing, ending the letter in an appropriate way, and reading through their writing to check for mistakes before they hand it in. And so that leads me to a basic principle, which is that we should only give our students a writing task with no guidance at all, no help from us, just a few weeks before the exam. When they go into the exam, they're all on their own, obviously. They have to do it without any help from us. And so for a few weeks before the exam, they should be practicing doing it on their own. But before that, in the weeks before that, the months before that, the years before that, because this takes years of training, we have to give them an enormous amount of help and guidance so that their final piece of writing is a success. And also so that when they hand in a piece of writing, it's not unsuccessful, which is demotivating for them, but also we don't have to spend hours and hours and hours with a red pen or a green pen, whatever it is, correcting it. So it makes our lives easier and it makes their lives much easier. So what we need to be doing, I think, is giving them an enormous amount of help and guidance with understanding the task, brainstorming the ideas and the information that they need to include in the task, the conventions of letter writing. I put that in brackets because if they're given the beginning of the letter and the end of the letter, that does make it a lot easier. But if they're not, they need to know exactly how we start and end a letter in English. All sorts of letter phrases that we can use in informal letters. Paragraph planning. Language is obviously vital in terms of grammar and vocabulary and register. And punctuation. We need to be giving them an enormous amount of help and guidance with all of these areas. Now, paragraph planning, as we've said, is extremely important. Of course, we could say, produce a paragraph plan, and then they just produce it. But I think at times we need to give them more help than that. Now, this is just an example. Obviously, we can adapt this depending on our needs. Starting the letter, ending the letter, not so important if those are given to them anyway. But we might want to produce something like this for our students, where each part of the letter is broken down into lines and paragraphs. And then the students, it's explained to them what the purpose of each paragraph of each part is. So paragraph 2, give your first piece of advice. Paragraphs 3 and 4, give further advice. This is just an example. And then we might give them useful words and phrases. And then we give them space where they put their information, their ideas, their words and phrases. And we, as the teacher, check this carefully before we ask them to do their piece of writing. And if this has been completed, then they're much more likely to produce a successful piece of writing in terms of structure and in terms of key language. So I strongly recommend that we do something like this with our students before they write a piece of writing. And then we also can give them some kind of checklist. Now, once again, this is just an example. They're very, very easy to produce. And we produce a checklist which we give to our students. And we say, before you hand in your piece of writing, after you've written your composition and checked it, you have to go through this checklist and you have to tick all the things that are true. Once again, these are just examples. You can change it so that it suits your needs. But I've used good phrases to give advice. I've written at least 4 paragraphs. I've checked my spelling and grammar. It could be other things. It could be I've used 1 or 2 informal idioms. I've used 1 or 2 phrasal verbs. It could be all sorts of different things. but a checklist where they tick it to show that they're thinking about these things and they've included them in their piece of writing. And if they're telling the truth, and you'll soon find out if they're not, then once again, the chances are, if they've ticked all of these boxes, that their piece of writing will not be a disaster. It will be a successful piece of writing, which is much more motivating for them and, as I said earlier, makes our lives easier in terms of marking and correcting. Now, model compositions, I think, are extremely important. The more models that we can give our students of the kind of writing we want them to produce, the better. Course books, of course, have models. This particular one is taken from the back of Get 200 from the Writing Bank, where there's a model question, a model answer, and lots of useful tips and information for the students on what to do and what not to do in their informal letter. Now, something else we can do with models that I think is very important is to compare different models. I think one of the things with course books, one of the problems with course books is that we tend to see writing in isolation. Unit 1 is informal letter, Unit 2 is essay, Unit 3 is review, Unit 4 is formal letter, etc. And we tend not to compare the different writing types. And the more that we can compare them in terms of the grammar that we use, the vocabulary that we use, the formality that we use, the better it is for students, I think. Now, sometimes, as I said earlier, at the end of this webinar, there's a PDF that you can download with all of the slides on. But sometimes when I give presentations, I don't give out a PDF. I give my email address and I ask people to send me an email. And that's quite interesting because when they send me the email, they have to get the level of formality right. So they have to think about their grammar and vocabulary and language in terms of formality. And it's very interesting, I think, to compare the different kinds of writing that people can produce. Now, this is, as I say, you don't need to send me an email because you can download the PDF at the end. But this is just an example. If, hypothetically, someone was writing to me to ask for the slides for the PDF, they might write this. Dear Mr. Mann, I am writing to thank you for your inspiring presentation yesterday at the British Council, Athens. I live in Athens. Entitled Teaching, Writing an Informal Letter. It was extremely useful and thought-provoking. I would be grateful if you could send me a PDF of the presentation slides. I am certain that my fellow teachers and students will benefit from them. Thank you again, and I look forward to attending another of your presentations in the near future. Yours sincerely, and then a name. Now, here's a quick question for you. Do you think that that is the appropriate level of formality to send to me as an email? Is it perfect? Is it inappropriate? What do you think? Just type something quickly into the chat box. You think it's, Rosanna thinks it's perfect, okay. It's fine, yes. It's definitely formal, isn't it? Good. It's good enough, perfect. Somebody said no, Marina said no. Was it Marina? Yep. I think the thing is, this is extremely formal. Now, if I was a very, very serious person, commanding respect, I think this would be perfect. But I like to think I'm kind of a friendly, easygoing person and that we can have a friendly, more semi-formal relationship. So for me, that's probably too formal. For other people, it might be perfect. And that's one of the problems, of course. Formality depends on how you see your relationship with the person that you're writing to. But certainly, there's no grammar mistakes, there's no vocabulary mistakes. Have a quick look at this one. I won't read it aloud. What do you think of the formality of this one? Is it formal? Is it informal? What is it? Right. This one's informal, isn't it? Ghana said semi-formal. I think this is quite informal. It starts with hi, it's got exclamation marks. Yeah, very informal. Some people might feel that's appropriate to send to me. I wouldn't mind at all receiving this, even though it's very informal. But other people might think, actually, I need to be a little bit more formal. So they might write this one. And this one, I think you'll agree, this one is semi-formal, isn't it? This is kind of in between. Is the sound bad, Vika? Can everyone else hear me okay? Okay, I think, right, this one's semi-formal. I think most people, perfect sound. Okay, good, thanks, Inna. So this one's semi-formal. This is in between the formal and the informal. Now, what about this one? Have a quick look at this one. What's this one? What's this one? Is it semi-formal? It's a mixture. Absolutely right. A mixture is a positive way of saying it. The negative way of saying that is that it's inconsistent. And this, I think, is the problem that lots of students have. They need to know the level of formality of every single piece of vocabulary and every single piece of grammar. And it's so easy for students to get it wrong, to make a piece of writing that's inconsistent. Svetlana, a salad. I completely agree. And when it's inconsistent, you lose marks. So this is what we need to get our students to avoid doing. And that means a huge amount of work with grammar and vocabulary, because our students need to know that the word fab is very informal. And they need to know that I would be grateful if is formal. So whenever we're teaching vocabulary and grammar, we mustn't forget to teach formality and register at the same time. And so I think a very good thing to get our students to do is to analyze and compare different models and to really go into detail. Just have another look at this one. We looked at this one a couple of minutes ago. You don't have to type into the chat box because there's lots of different things here. But what are the different things? Just take 30 seconds to think about it. What are the different things that make this very formal? The different bits of vocabulary, the different bits of grammar. If you can't hear anything, Anna, you'll have to play with your volume, because I think other people can hear me okay. But then you can't hear me saying that. So there's vocabulary, there's register, the ending, right, there's all sorts of things. I've listed them here. The vocabulary I've put in red. Using the word dear, I am writing to thank you for is a formal expression. The word entitled, the phrase, I would be grateful if you could. The word certain is more formal than the word sure. My fellow teachers, to use the word fellow is formal. The verb benefit is formal. Thank you, not thanks, is more formal. I look forward to doing is a formal structure. In the near future is more formal than soon. Yours sincerely is a formal letter ending. So there's vocabulary and set phrases that make it formal. There's also grammar that makes it formal. I am certain that. We could drop the word that, and that makes it a little bit more informal. In terms of punctuation, there are no exclamation marks. And there are no contractions, no short forms. You might think that contractions are grammar, that's fine. I'm including them here in punctuation, it doesn't matter. And in terms of information, there's some information we include in formal letters that we don't include in informal letters. So this kind of task, getting our students to focus on exactly what it is that makes it formal, I think is very useful. And similarly, what makes this semi-formal? Dear, not hi, for example. Many thanks. Could you send me is more informal than I would be grateful if you can send me. I'm sure, not I'm certain. Really benefit. Really is a kind of semi-formal and informal word. I'm looking forward to, not I look forward to. Next, not in the near future. All the best, not yours sincerely. Once again, there's no exclamation marks. Exclamation marks make it informal. And there's one or two short forms. I'm sure, not I am sure. And they make it semi-formal. And there's some issues with information as well. And then what makes this informal, we should be getting our students to focus on all the key bits of grammar and vocabulary that actually make it informal. Hi, not dear. Great to meet you. Thanks a lot. Can you send me? Not could you send me? Not I would be grateful if you could send me. Okay, to use the word okay is informal. To use the word to, T-O-O, not as well, is informal. There's some grammar. If it's I'll, that grammatical structure is informal. There are exclamation marks and there are short forms. It's okay. I'll share it with you. And there are some information issues that make it informal as well. So this kind of comparison, I think, is very useful for our students. And what we can then do, we could give them, for example, completely agree, the more models we give, the more they'll understand exactly. We can give them the formal equivalent and get them to rewrite it as semi-formal and then rewrite it as informal. And depending on their level, we can give them some help. So for certain gaps, we might give them multiple choice options. They choose between I can't wait till, or I'm looking forward to, or I look forward to. So they're choosing the different level of formality at each point. Something else we can do, once again, because we only focus usually on one writing type in each unit, we tend not to compare writing types. So we can easily, let's say halfway through the course or at the end of the year, we can easily produce a little chart like this. Now, this is just an example where Unit 1 is informal letter, Unit 2 is story or essay or whatever it is. And we get the students to go back and look at the model for each unit or the composition that they wrote for each unit. And we get them to focus on certain aspects of style. So which one or ones use a lively, chatty, almost conversational style? Is that informal letter, short story, essay, formal letter? And if it is, they put a tick. And if it isn't, they put a cross. Which one discusses a subject in a logical and formal way? The ones they do, they put a tick, and the ones that don't, they put a cross. And then when you go through this in class, they have to come up with concrete examples from their own writing or from the models. And they have to say, this essay discusses a subject in a logical and formal way because it does this, this, this. Or this is a conversational style, and here are 3 examples. So we get them to give real concrete examples. And then we can go into more detail. And once again, this is just an example. You can change the categories. So we can have, for example, here, short forms, discursive phrases and expressions, informal punctuation. You might want to have phrasal verbs. You might want to have idioms. There's all sorts of categories. And they look through the compositions from the previous 6 units or the whole book, whatever it is. They tick and cross, and they give concrete examples. Very simple, but very effective. Now, I just want to spend a few minutes, we've got about 10 more minutes. I just want to spend 5 minutes on some top tips for our students when they're writing informal letters. And I'll mention other writing types as well at times. So contractions, short forms. An easy way to make your writing more informal is to use contractions, short forms. If you're writing an informal letter, you should use them. If you're writing formal English, you shouldn't use them. I know language is not as strict as it used to be, but it's an easy way of showing formality. So I will share it with my colleagues as formal. I'll see you soon is informal. I can't wait. Not I cannot wait. I can't wait. And that's why semi-formal, I'm looking forward to. Formal, I am looking forward to without the contraction. And very formal, I look forward to, of course. So use contractions in informal writing. Relative pronouns, this is an interesting one. An easy way to make your writing more formal is to use which, etc., and who. An easy way to make your writing more informal, when it's grammatically possible, is to use that or no pronoun at all. So formal, this is a problem which many people face. Semi-formal, this is a problem that a lot of people face. Now we've changed many to a lot of as well. But which going to that is more informal. And then to leave it out completely, it's a problem lots of people have, and we've changed face to have, but we've left out the relative pronoun. That's even more informal. So that's a useful tip for our students. So when we're teaching relative pronouns, we should also be teaching formality. Will and be going to. Now, unfortunately, we often teach that the difference is only a matter of function. That be going to is used, for example, for predictions based on present evidence, and will isn't used for that. Now, that actually is not true. And in Destination and Laser and other books, we're actually very careful to tell the truth, which is that often it's not a question of function, it's a question of formality. And will is more formal than be going to. And the apostrophe LL, the short form of will, is more informal, obviously. So in an essay, for example, when we're being formal, it is unclear whether this will prove to be successful in the long term. That's actually a prediction based on present evidence, which is exactly the same function as this one, but in an informal letter, we wouldn't use the full form will because it's too formal. And this is a mistake that lots of students make. Their informal letter sounds too formal. So I'm not sure if I will pass or not. I'm not sure if I'm gonna pass or not. Going to. We say gonna. And that's why we use gonna in text messages, because it's informal. Or we could say with apostrophe LL, I'm not sure if I'll pass or not. But to use the full form is too formal. So a useful tip. Phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are usually not used in formal writing, such as essays. They're very rare in academic writing, but they're great to use in informal writing and semi-formal writing, articles, reviews, and informal letters. And this is another problem students make. They use the formal form, so it took them hours to extinguish the fire. It's too formal for an informal letter. Much better to use the phrasal verb, put out. And so when we're teaching phrasal verbs, we need to be teaching that actually the verbs on the left are usually formal. They're perfect for essays. But in things like informal letters and articles, much better to use the equivalent phrasal verb. So try to use, is the top tip to the students, 1 or 2 phrasal verbs in each informal letter. Is it possible to have the presentation? Yes, you'll get a PDF you can download right at the end. And the same thing with idioms. Idioms are very, very rarely used. You shouldn't use in formal writing. You shouldn't use them in academic writing such as essays. But they're brilliant to use in informal writing such as informal letters. So in a nutshell, by the way, it rings a bell, fantastic to use in an informal letter. And we should encourage our students to use 1 or 2 idioms in each of their informal letters and not to use them in their essays. Similarly, the verb get. Get is used, it's very, very frequent in spoken English and informal written English. Very, very rare in formal English and academic English. So they should avoid it in essays, but in an informal letter, try to use it appropriately once or maybe twice in an informal letter. And of course, there are a huge number of different meanings of get. Be, buy, receive, acquire, purchase, give, receive, become, catch, persuade, convince. You can see them all here. You can look at this later. And we can give our students a task where we've got some fairly formal sentences. Number 6, for example, the Prime Minister, PM is Prime Minister, the Prime Minister finally got the cabinet to support her. If that's a formal sentence, they can come up with a better, more formal equivalent, such as persuaded or convinced. And then with that meaning, they can write a sentence with a more informal subject. So she finally got her brother to lend her money, for example. So they understand all the different meanings of get and can use them. Collocations. Teaching collocations, of course, as part of vocabulary is absolutely vital. We also need to teach our students which collocations are formal and which are informal. And just one example, little and small often mean the same thing in English. Little frequently collocates with informal things. A little boy, a little kitten, a little kid, a little baby, in a little while. They're all informal. Whereas small usually collocates with formal things. So it's much better to use in essays. A small amount of, a small part of, a small quantity. There are a couple of exceptions. Inversions with little are formal. You could use, I suppose, little did I know in an informal letter because it's an idiom, but usually inversions with little are formal, and little when it means not much, that's formal as well. But in other collocations, little is informal and small is formal. Discursive phrases, very, very important for our students to know discursive phrases for essays and articles and reviews and letters and whatever, but they need to know when they can use them and when they can't use them. So here's a little question for you. We've got 4 discursive phrases: in my view, what's more, in conclusion, and furthermore. Which ones of those could students use in an informal letter? What's more? Yep, I agree. In my view, absolutely. But not in conclusion and furthermore. Those are not appropriate because they're too formal. Perfect for essays, but not for informal letters. So we need to be teaching our students when we do these kind of things, when they can use them and when they can't use them. And punctuation, we should remind our students to use some exclamation marks in informal writing, such as informal letters, because without them, the tone can sound very serious and very dry. So they should use exclamation marks in informal letters. They shouldn't, of course, use them in essays at all, because we never use them in formal writing. Now, I've got 3 minutes, so I'll just whiz through this. Helen's asked me to say just a few words about Get 200, the new 2-level course, exam prep course for Ukraine. Now, what we did, we wrote for each level, we've got one whole unit based on culture and the country and the geography and all different aspects of Ukraine. So we've got a whole unit in each book that's very, very personalized for the students in terms of their own lives, their own culture, their own history, their own country. And just in terms, because we're talking about writing an informal letter, I just want to whiz through the unit, an example unit, because interestingly, a huge amount of it, I know you can't see it clearly in the screen, but you can look at copies of the book. A huge amount of it is very useful for writing informal letters. We start off a very personalized page where the students are working on their own activities, things they do in their own lives. And in exercise 2, they're writing sentences that are perfect to use, interestingly, in an informal letter. And then we have a huge amount of work on vocabulary. There are 3 full pages of vocabulary, and all of this vocabulary is perfect for writing, particularly for writing informal letters. So we've got collocations, adjectives and qualifying adverbs, word building. We've even got here a sample informal email. So it's very handy for writing informal letters. Topic vocabulary, verb noun collocations, all the different aspects of vocabulary, and lots of interesting texts about life in Ukraine. So I hope that your students will really feel that this unit belongs to them and is about them and their lives. Then we've got 2 pages of listening. And once again, interestingly, a lot of the ideas and the language used here, and there's some speaking here as well. And of course, speaking is very similar to informal writing. A lot of this is relevant to writing an informal letter. And of course, there are exam tasks throughout the book. Then we have 2 pages of reading. And once again, the texts are all about Ukraine. So I really think the students will find these relevant and interesting. And then we have use of English, which is more lexicogrammar, vocabulary and the grammar of vocabulary. So adjectives, prepositions, the texts are all about Ukraine. The vocabulary is all relevant vocabulary that they can use in informal writing. So I think it's really useful. And then, of course, we have an actual writing section. And in this particular unit on Ukraine, we're doing informal letters. In fact, the first one's an informal postcard. The second one's an exam task informal letter, which are very similar. We give them useful phrases. We give them vocabulary expansion. So not just using nice and good all the time, coming up with a broader range of vocabulary. We give them sentence beginnings that they need to finish. And of course, you can consolidate and supplement this by doing some of the things we mentioned earlier. The paragraph plan, for example, and the checklist, and studying the model at the back of the book. So that is exactly 40 minutes. In fact, it's 41 minutes. I was asked to speak for 40 minutes. So I think we'll stop there unless anybody has any questions or comments. But I don't know how much the book is. You'll have to ask the Macmillan reps. But I do hope you found that useful. Don't forget that you can download the PDF. I think Ina or Elena or someone will upload that in a second. Here it comes. Now, just one thing, the 2 charts in the middle, they didn't come out properly in the PDF, but you did see them on the screen, so you'll know what they're supposed to look like. Let me just look at the comments. Well, you're very welcome. I'm glad you found that useful. Book 1 and Book 2 are different levels. Talk to your Macmillan rep, who will explain much more about that. Good, I'm really glad you found that useful and interesting. And it was wonderful to see so many people here today. Absolutely fabulous, from all over Ukraine as well. You're extremely welcome. I always love doing webinars for Ukraine, and I hope to get out to see you again as soon as I can. And I'm glad you like Get 200.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. It was really very useful, very helpful, very important information which you shared with our colleagues from all over the country. There are lots of some practical questions about purchasing. It's not the place where we can answer these questions. So those who are interested, you may contact either our office and the phone number you can get at our website, or you can contact your local distributors and ask the questions about how much it costs and so on and so forth. Today our webinar is devoted to teaching and writing informal letters using one of our new courses, which is Get 200. I want to remind you that Malcolm is one of the co-authors. Particularly, he wrote the unit about Ukraine in the world. Very touching attitude, very touching things you included in this unit, where we really love what you have written. Malcolm, I
Much.
I
Thank you.
I heard that
I'm
you
glad
wanted
you like-
to
I'm
share
glad you
your
like the material.
presentation, right?
Yes, the PDF, absolutely.
Can you explain
Yes.
our attendees how to download your presentation?
Oh, well, I can see it in front of me as a PDF. Can they not see that? You click on it and then just click download. Can you not see that? Yes. Miss Julia's done it already. Click on the PDF and then just click download and then you've got it. Right, there we go. People have got it. Certificates, it'll have to tell you about that. Everyone will get a certificate though, I know that. Right, well, I'm going to say goodbye unless you need me for anything else.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. We're looking forward to your next webinar for Ukraine.
Me too. Bye for now then. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.